neocolonialism is still a thing. Neocolonialism is stifling the prospect and the future of fashion brands around the world because neocolonialism needs to make sure that the only people that benefit from the system are the Westerners. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome if you're new. Welcome back if you're revenant. Please consider subscribing if you like everything and anything about fashion, critical thinking, and yapping. And before we start the video, I want to give a little PSA because, as you may have noticed, there was not any video last week, and it's because I have started a new job and I need to, get into it to update myself on everything, especially that we have upcoming events. And I work in communication, by the way. So, I need to really be on top of things. And basically, because I have a new office job as a whole, it also means that my schedule uploads is going to change. So it's more like I'm going to upload whenever I have time because I still want to be making interesting, somehow researched video as well. So, the whole researching part, it can take quite some time. So, like I'm about quality over quantity. So just to let you know that since, I have like a new thing in my life, my schedule uploads is going to change. I still hope that you're going to stay around because I very much enjoy sharing my pieces with you and, having you sharing your thoughts on the matter. And yeah, but I just wanted to let you know about that my schedule uploads is going to change because now I have an office job. I'm not freelance anymore. So anyways, so today's video, I want to talk about how fashion still upholds colonialism. And I feel like that it's something, if you do watch my video, you might have, connected the dots that is still the case. But recently, Fashion Roadman on Instagram, he does amazing videos about, fashion, and especially fashion from, another perspective that is not just Western centered. He posted a reel on his Instagram that I shared, and his reel was about what is fashion so Western centric. And he was talking about how every time he talks about fashion brands that are from the global south, people's attention is waning. People don't seem very interested in that.
I have a big issue with the way that fashion is taught and our general discourse around fashion in general. Sometimes I feel like people speak about fashion in a way that fashion has only existed in Europe and the USA. And I can definitely say that this subconsciously affects how people see certain designers' work. I've noticed when I talk about or write an article around a designer that isn't from the typical London, Paris, Milan, New York sort of thing, people lose interest. You can almost see people's attention span waning. But then someone who is from these Western countries copies these designers that I'm talking about, and they're a legend and they're a legendary designer. This is why when I was at CSM, I was really deliberate in making sure that I didn't perpetuate this. So I had a project on Tebe Mugugu, who's from South Africa. I did a fashion documentary in South Africa. I did one in Turkey. I also did my dissertation on queer creativity in Nigeria. A good example to express my point is Paul Poiret. Paul Poiret is obviously a very famous and legendary couturier, and I think that he's rightfully so legendary for many reasons. I mean, he made so many different silhouettes. He's known for things like the lampshade tunic. And I think one of his biggest contributions to fashion actually is teaching couturiers how to make a lifestyle fashion brand, because Paul Poiret had perfume and home decor and all these things. But one thing that really irks me when I read about Paul Poiret in the past is how they describe when he was basically copying a lot of Asian designers' work that he was seeing, or copying a lot of things that he saw in Asia, is how they would describe it as like this exotic Orientalism, which makes me so uneasy. And it's also strange because I'm very sure that the same designers who are designing those things that he was inspired by, if they went to France, no one would care because it's not coming from the right person, or it's not through the lens of the right person.
And I reshared it, explaining about how this is a result of colonialism and neocolonialism, and also Western exceptionalism, where basically the West has put itself in such a pedestal, you know, because again, colonialism, eugenics, and all of that, that everything that stems from that comes from another part of the world that the West deemed as lesser than them is going to be disregarded differently. And this video needs kind of a continuation of fashion literacy, because I do believe that fashion literacy is very, very important. The more we start questioning things and the more we start kind of realizing that everything is connected, the better it's going to be for us to push for a system change. So we're going to talk about what is fashion so Western centric and the problem that it is and how it's still perpetuating colonialism. For this first chapter, I want to talk about how Western countries have never been post-colonial, and if anything, they've just been neo-colonial, because there's this belief that the West is now past its colonial times. And there's even post-colonial theories and studies that you can take, but this is all a show. Let me explain. The West has never really been post-colonial, because colonial times, when it came in the 19th century, which was the highest phase of imperialism, brought to the West a lot of financial prosperity. In a capitalistic society, financial prosperity is something you need to thrive on. And in order to do that, you need to find ways so you remain in that financial prosperity. To do that, exploitation is a requirement. And if you pay attention to Western societies and how it's always Western societies being in the top 10 of the financial prosperity chart, you kind of realize that financial prosperity comes with a price. And the price is the lives of the people in the global south. In the fashion realm, we are all aware, ever since the 2014 Rana Plaza incident, which killed thousands of Bangladeshi working in a factory, and they were literally, it was like a sweatshop, and they were making a lot of clothes for Western brands. From that moment on, we've been aware of the really harsh conditions that those people were under when it came to the working conditions, the safety conditions, and literally knowing that they were paid pennies. And the reason why it is like that, and the reason also why a lot of the Western countries and the Western brands have delocalized their working force, is because of neocolonialism. Colonialism has brought in a whole set of human dehumanization. You need to understand that because of imperialism in the 19th century taking up steam, they needed to find justification to the atrocities that they were putting on black and brown bodies. And for that justification, they needed academic validation of what they were doing was actually justifiable. It was actually right. They needed to do that. And that academic validation came with coming with studies and coming with sets of criteria explaining about how black and brown bodies were not at the same level of white bodies, that our civilization, which is Western civilization, was better than the black and brown civilization. As someone who studied sociology and anthropology, which are two fields which basically came about in the 19th century in order to justify colonialism and all the genocide and atrocities that have been put upon black and brown bodies, it's important to understand that, you know, that justification and the fact that the academic world had to come up with something which we're all made up. And I know that the sociology and anthropology department are acknowledging it. I remember that we had like some courses where they were talking about the origins of sociology and anthropology, and how a lot of the studies today are completely bogus, and the whole field is trying to kind of revamp itself from its colonial origins, because that's literally the thing. But that validation explained and justified the dehumanization of black and brown bodies. What happened in the past, unless it is fully acknowledged and fully talked about and fully deconstructed, it still has impact in the present. And that is why we are still talking about discriminations and oppressions that we are still enduring as black and brown bodies. Because, and also Eastern Europeans, because let's not forget that Eastern European bodies also are victims of it. I mean, all people in the world, unless you're part of the ruling class, all people are victim of colonialism and the colonial rule at different levels. But I wanted to explain about how the whole set of dehumanization still has impact today, to the point that the delocalization of the factories of fashion brands in the global south was because when something is happening to black and brown bodies, because the whole society, the whole Western society has made it to dehumanize and to justify the death of those bodies. If you delocalize your factory in one of those countries and something is happening there, well, people are not going to care that much. People are not really going to worry, because we are so used to black and brown death. And that's horrible to say, but that is the truth. That is just how Western civilization has made of its own civilization. It's accepting and justifying and normalizing the death of black and brown bodies. And it's something that you can still see today with the genocides happening in all of Palestine, which is Gaza and the West Bank, and also in the Congo, in the DRC, that has been happening for many, many years. There's a reason why we call it the silent genocide. And also the war that is happening in Sudan, that has been propped up by the West as well. And just in general, the racism that black and brown bodies face here in the West is so normalized. When you see, like, for example, there was a Palestinian man in Antwerp, Belgium, that has been lynched. And I have not seen any Western mainstream outlets, news outlet, talking about it. And everything is always very blurred and all that jazz. And just like the police brutality happening as well, which now Western bodies are being at the receiving end of that brutality for protesting genocide, and suddenly Western bodies are kind of understanding that police brutality is actually a real living thing, you know? So by this all type of dehumanization and normalization of black and brown lives being lesser than Western lives, we are facing what is neocolonialism. Because as of today, we still, like, black and brown bodies are still facing horrible conditions. The reason why a lot of immigrants are like fleeing their countries is because Western countries still wants to have a hand on the resources of those global south countries, and in order to do that, you know, they believe that they have all the power and they have all the kind of rights to do it. So they're going to fund groups, they're going to fund coups, they're going to fund so many, you know, horrible things to destabilize those countries in order to have a hand on those countries. When you, for example, see like countries such as France, the UK, the United States, and other colonial countries still not wanted to give up on the rule that they have in those, like what they call ex-colonies, which are not ex-colonies, it is a sign that post-colonialism is not a real thing. Post-colonialism is just a field that has been created so Western countries can give this image of progress when Western countries have never been progressive in the first place. You cannot want, you know, constant expectation and death, and, you know, diminishing your citizen right and liberties, which has been happening over the years, and basically having all those conservative sets of ideologies and then calling yourself progressive. The West is all about showing, you know, like showing in a way that the West is all about blabbing. They love to blab, they love to talk. But then when it comes to really showing and then kind of really doing what they need to do, they're not going to do it. But they love to pretend that they're better than the global south. Like, for example, when you see what's happening right now in France with dictator Emmanuel Macron refusing to acknowledge the elections that happened like 2 months ago and to elect leftist prime minister, because, you know, majority of the people have actually voted for the new Popular Front, and completely disregarding it. This is dictatorship. But France is also the first one to point the fingers when other like African leaders, African or Middle Eastern or any, like, you know, global South leaders were doing the same thing. France and all the West were very quick to say something. But then when Western countries are basically becoming dictatorships and like full on fascistic, suddenly people are really, really quiet about that. Suddenly, like, the condemnation are not actually really loud. And it's because Western countries are all in for the same thing, to make sure that the system that they rely on, which is capitalism, which is a deadly system, which is a system that requires overly exploitation, remains. So for that to happen, not only they need the subjugation of black and brown bodies to remain, because how are they going to get endless resources, which, by the way, are not even endless, because resources do run out at some point, and this is already happening. But how are they going to manage to still openly and like openly just go and steal those resources for their own benefit if they don't subjugate the people over there, you know? And the thing is, now that the people in the West are also protesting that and be like, actually, that's not a great thing. You keep talking about, the rules of law and respecting the law and being civilized, and you are acting actually completely contrary to what you're saying. And if you've been a marginalized person whose family and entire kind of lineage has been under the wrath of the Western imperialism, you kind of know that it's something that has always been happening. That is why I always find it like so funny when I see in the West like post-colonial studies, and those post-colonial studies are always talking about how now we are completely over the colonial times and it's not even a thing, knowing that it took also decades for the Western countries to acknowledge the atrocities and the colonialism that they did, because they never seen it as something wrong. Like the West don't see colonialism and the death of black and brown bodies that they have normalized as something wrong. And they've just been acknowledging it after decades of pressure from black and brown bodies, being like, you've been genociding us for decades, you've been destabilizing our countries for decades, but you never even, apologize for that. There's this thing where even reparations is not in the table, especially when we talk about black and brown bodies, where those countries are going to be like acknowledging that, yes, okay, we did something bad and we're sorry. But then when we're asking for reparations, such as, can you please give us back the artifact that you stole from us, Western countries are not willing to do that. Suddenly they're going to come up with the lamest excuses, such as, "Oh, but you don't know how to, keep them up." Can you imagine like pillaging someone's house and, artifact that was made from his entire lineage? And so, because it was made by his lineage and his people, they do know how to take care of it. And then having like that guy, that Western guy, like pillaging it, then bringing it back to his home, and then when you're asking for it back, he's telling you, "Oh, but actually, you won't know how to take care of it." Like, can you see? That's something like the audacity of the West has been like so blatant for me for many years, but it's just insane that it kind of needed a like full on streamed genocide for people to realize that Western countries have never been post-colonial, and to kind of maybe wonder that what is actually Western civilization, because what do you mean you're supposed to uphold the rules of law, but you are backing a genocide? You are repressing and suppressing like voices in your own country that are protesting the killings of people. How are you really post-colonial when you are supporting and have been supporting a colonial entity this entire time? And the response is because the West has never been post-colonial. The West has always been neocolonial. It's just that colonialism has been repackaged in new ways. But the colonialism has always existed because colonialism and capitalism do come together. And the reason why Western countries have managed to keep themselves so financially prosperous is because they still relied on colonial tactics. It's just that it was rebranded different ways, but it's still colonial practices. Now that you understand that Western countries have never been post colonial, but it has always been neocolonialism, and it's just that post colonialism is a concept that has been created in order to ease the Western mind. It is also important to understand that the institutions within the Western world are going to benefit from this neocolonialism. And like I explained previously, colonialism and capitalism go together because you don't have any colonialism without capitalism. And the thing is, they just managed to conceal the colonial tactics to the people, but it's just that it's always been there. And one of the fields that do benefit from that neocolonialism a lot is the fashion field. And I've always been thinking about the entire luxury, fashion realm, because I wondered who gets to decide what is a luxury brand and what is not a luxury brand. Because if luxury is defined by the craftsmanship, well, why aren't global south brands also, big fashion houses and also talked about in that way? Because when you think about luxury brands, and if you ask anyone to name you any luxury brands, they're going to name you mainly Western luxury brands. But you're never really going to hear about, global South luxury brands. And it's something that is actually so kind of been very interesting to me, because the moment I kind of realized that luxury brands were only and mainly Western brands, and I started to connect the dots, that's the moment I kind of realized that, luxury is a realm that is very exclusive. And when you made it, you can afford to have luxury item. People also regard you very highly, because it's a whole celebration of capitalism. But I'm gonna have a video on the whole like luxury realm and the problem with it. But you are very much seen very highly. So especially when you come from the global south, if you can manage to have like real luxury brands, it's that you made it, you literally on top of your business, and nobody can tell you anything. But yeah, the more I started thinking about that, the more I was just like, if craftsmanship is the defining factor of a luxury brand, global south brands and global south fashion should be seen as luxurious, because they do use really high quality fabrics. They do make clothes themselves. It's usually it has always been especially when you think about traditional clothing, it's been clothes that have been made by the people in communities, and using like fabrics that they've made themselves, or that they just collected to make it together. I mean, it's always been like a really there's a really beautiful craftsmanship that comes from the global south, but that is highly diminished by the west, because again, the west, in its quest of global power, because that's basically what the west is doing, it's having global power, it cannot accept that like global south countries that they've made sure to be seen as less than can be on the same level. Like this idea that brown and black brains can actually come up with amazing creation and kind of be innovative and groundbreaking is not possible when your values are based on the dehumanization and the belittling of those people. And it's a system of beliefs that, even though they are not really maybe said openly and, widely, at least not into our faces, the way the system operates, and when you pay attention to who are giving the time of the day, just suggests it. It suggests that the Western brands, the Western fashion is the only one that gets to be seen as highly. And I talked about, luxury fashion, because luxury fashion is deeply classist and deeply unequal in so many ways, even like just like within the fashion um well, like luxury fashion world. It's really just destined for a really small bunch, and the small bunch are, the very wealthy bunch. And a lot of those very wealthy bunch, if you do pay attention to, for example, Forbes charts that they do of who's the wealthiest, even that, I think it's just completely dumb to do like a chart of who's the wealthiest in the world, and we're supposed to see that highly. A lot of the people on those lists, a lot of them are Westerners, and it's because the wealth is really, really badly, you know, distributed, and it's a continuation again of these colonial rules of making sure that a lot of the families that are still super wealthy today are families that benefited from the slave trade, from 19th century colonialism. All those families today made their money because of the exploitation and the dehumanization of the black and brown bodies. And it's like wealth they accumulated, and that they managed to keep, and they managed to still accumulate, because Western world is not post-colonialism, it's just neo-colonial. And even when you think about just fashion as a whole, like when you think about fast fashion brands, like the fast fashion brands that gets to go global are Western fashion brands, we don't have like non-Western fashion brands going global. Like those non-Western fashion brands, they stay where they are, but it's, we only give the privilege to one category of people, and that category of people are the one who are benefiting and who've been benefiting from this neoliberal, capitalistic, and neo-colonial society. And the moment you kind of start like seeing that, it's when you understand why the disregard and the disinterest with designers from the global south stems from. In the Roadman video, he was also talking about how when a Western couturier or designer steals an innovation, or steals an artifact, or steals something, from a global south designer, and then like call it like its own, suddenly the innovation, the designer is celebrated, but the culture or the person that has actually come up with the idea is going to be completely ignored. And that's what then leads to cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation is basically this: is Western designers stealing from global south or minority designers, and suddenly it's, an amazing thing, when even that element has been existing in, minority groups for many, many years. But suddenly it becomes a thing. It's always that the moment it has the seal of approval of the West, then it's worthy to be talked about. And it all stems from, and it all boils down to Western countries still seeing themselves at the very, very top of everything. And as this beacon of civilization, to the point that everything that is made in the West, everything that stems from the West, can only be seen as great, and things that are seen and made in the global South are not going to be talked about, or if they are, they're going to be belittled or diminished. But I feel like that it's this idea that, you know, it's either you have to see things in a Western centric way, or it's not worth talking. And when I say that, is, for example, I think about the fashion weeks that exist, and there's we know about the New York Fashion Week, the Paris Fashion Week, the Milan Fashion Week, and now even Copenhagen is gaining like more recognition, and has been for many years now, because I feel like that Copenhagen is all about, it's known for its very sustainable fashion, and so now it has a scene and kind of everyone flocks there because of the Fashion Week. But we don't give the same energy to, for example, Lagos Fashion Week, or even in South Africa, I think, is it Johannesburg, where they also have like a fashion week there. I know that there's one in the Middle East, and in Asia, but those fashion weeks over there are not seen as really highly. We don't talk about them, or it's talked about very, very little, because we cannot prop them up, because again, this neo-colonial tactics means that everything that does not come from the West cannot be seen as highly, cannot be celebrated, because this hierarchy needs to exist where Western prowess is at the top, and then the rest has to be hindered behind. This idea that only, like, if you make it into a Western fashion week, then people are going to talk about you. This very, unbalanced and, like, let's say what it is, very racist way of thinking that only Western brands can do great when it comes to, in this situation, fashion. It's a colonial way of thinking, because the rest of the world has so much to offer. Like, we thrive as a people because we get to exchange, we get to grow from each other's experiences. Like I said in my previous video, that personal style is collective. That's something that needs to be understood in a way that we do impact and influence each other. That's completely normal. And we need to, celebrate that, instead of, having this hierarchy of, okay, if it's a Western brand or Western designer or couturier, it's going to be at the top. But then if it's not, it's going to be below it. This, kind of thing is so problematic. But again, it boils down to capitalism, because capitalism requires exploitation, requires hierarchy, requires that Western prowess and Western, anything Western made and anything Western, originated, has to be at the top, and it has to stay at the top. And we cannot think about proving them wrong, proving that, like, non-Western fashion is also worth being talked about. Because when you function with a system whose entire goal for 500 years has been to dehumanize and to belittle anybody that does not come from the West. It's a procedure that is going to take a lot of time to completely deconstruct, dissect, in order to understand that the reason why Global South brand are not being put in the same pedestal as the West is deliberately made because Western brands need to be kept at the top. Everything that actually comes from the West keeps being tinted with that imperialism, that supremacy. So nobody can actually take over. Because if something Western values is scared, then the atrocities that they have committed onto the global South is going to turn onto them. And the reason why there's this fear is because they know that what they did was actually so bad, and like brown and black bodies have all the right to be completely infuriated by that. And since the West is actually a minority, they know they don't have the power for that. So keeping the financial advantage in so many aspects of life and industries is the only way the West is making sure that they're not going to lose their power grip. Another thing that comes to mind a lot when I think about brands from the global South is how neocolonialism has worked so well that even countries in the global South see the West as this beacon of everything and an example to follow. Because, like Western countries are making sure that countries in the global South remains as struggling and impoverished as possible, because when those people don't get to have the freedom to do like whatever they want to do, and they have to rely on Western countries, then comes philanthropy and all that in order to survive. Well, it also stifle any possibilities to prop up your own industry in a way that you can then push and fund your own people, and have like a thriving economy and a thriving fashion field, because a lot of fashion designers from the global South are always seeking for the approval of the West, because they know that there's not much possibilities in their countries of origins. And the reason why the global South is the way it is because the West is making sure those countries are staying like that. The West is always aiming for global power, and global power means that you have a hands on the rest of the world, and you're going to create crises, and you're going to create situations that are going to subjugate countries that you've colonized and that has been colonized to stay in state of dependency to you. And when this happens, like you have a lot of your brains, like meaning the people from a country, kind of leaving your country, because when there's no future that they can actually really make it in their own country, they're going to try to find opportunities elsewhere. And there's always something that pisses me off a bit when I see that some like of those brains and those people, then people's brand get bought off by a Western corporation, because then I'm like, no, no. It always kind of make me sad to see that those people who I'm pretty sure would love to stay in their countries and kind of thrive in their countries and have like an industry that is working there, because people are not leaving their countries for fun. Like, it's a very Western way of thinking that you live in your country for fun. People are not living in the country for fun, especially the people in the global south. A lot of them are living there because the situation is such that when you don't really see much of your future being made there, you're going to try to find it elsewhere. And again, this is the product of Western imperialism to make sure that those countries stays in the like struggling state, because when you have people that are struggling, that are vulnerable, you can easily have control over them. And when you reaching for global power, you need to have control over those bodies, especially bodies that you have dehumanized and diminished and belittled for centuries. And like, we don't talk much about like the psychological and mental effect that colonialism has, but it marks people, it marks, and it's suffering that then get passed down from generation to generation. There have been studies that have proven that trauma is something that is actually passed down through generation. And it's yeah, it's a very sad side view, to just see how neocolonialism is still a thing. Neocolonialism is stifling the prospect and the future of fashion brands around the world, because neocolonialism needs to make sure that the only people that benefit from the system are the Westerners, and it's just shows how the system that we live not only is unfair, but it has never advocated for an actual free market or an actual equality and equity and everything like that, because you cannot have that if you want to make sure that you are hoarding the most money. It's something for me that is so baffling when I see that some billionaires have like their personal worth and personal wealth is more than the GDP of some countries in the global south. It's actually so infuriating to see that, and it's Western billionaires having so much of that money, and you just like, if the wealth was distributed fairly, it would actually allow for greatness to be exchanged among country and to have a proper free market, like they call it. Because fuck the like capitalistic free market. It's not that the Western countries get to decide who is part of that market and who is not, and it's always so it goes in the interest of the West. So it's not a free market when there's conditions that is only benefiting one group, But yeah, seeing all that and seeing that those brands then need the seal of approval of the West, otherwise they cannot really thrive or live off that. It's just sad. And I've been trying to think about solutions and things like that. And, I feel that apart from talking about it's, I don't know, like, the only problem that we have is the system. We need to get rid of the current system to make sure that everything else is um liberated and get to really be free. And so we give like equal opportunities to people around the world, and that those opportunities are not just for the Westerners, So like fashion is actually for the people, and not just this very niche thing that if you want to make it, you need to have the seal of approval of the West, or you need to be in the West. Because even in the West, like there's very few creators of colors, like designers of colors that are propped up. It's something like, for example, when you think about like luxury brands, again, let's go back to those. And you see the creative directors of those luxury brands, it's very male, it's very white. And to also know that majority of those luxury brands are not even independent. They are owned by like a fashion conglomeration that is making a bunch of money to one family only, and then that family gets to decide who they're going to prop up. And that's the whole problem with the system. It's just that those brands not only are not propped up because of neocolonialism, but that neocolonialism means that the people who are benefiting from it get to decide who they're putting in the forefront. And of course, they're not going to put in the forefront brands from the global south. It's so sad because fashion is a form of art, and the fact that fashion has been turned into this highly capitalistic endeavor, to the point that the whole art form, where art is made to be shared, to be spread around, to influence, but it's a collective art. So the fact that now, because of the system, it has been turned into this kind of, a lot of robbery, a lot of appropriation, a lot of like racism, a lot of exclusion, is just sad. That is straight up sad. I don't know if you have the same feeling, but fashion is getting a bit boring, especially when you look at, those brands, because it's the same Western brand doing the same thing. And since they're all about the money, everyone is hopping on the same trends, and nothing is original anymore. And, it's it's always like the small designers that are doing like really interesting things. And it's a lot of designers from the global south that are really doing very amazing things, but they don't have the funds for it. So a lot of them are struggling. It's just really sad how the system that we have been promised to be like, more freedom, more anything, is just a repackaged way to do colonialism. There's so much greatness, especially in fashion, that could be shared widely and promoted, but because of neocolonialism, it's not. And unless you have an interest to really look up for more innovation and for designers from other parts of the world, you're not going to find them otherwise, because Western hegemony is more important than actual sharing of ideas and actual equality. That's this idea that the West is at the top and only the West. Okay, people, so that is it for my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments what are your thoughts on this whole fashion is upholding colonialism, and the fact that so many brands from the global south are not being celebrated or propped up and all of that. I'd love to know your thought on that. And I also hope that you find with my scheduling, my new scheduling um, model, which is going to be more like I'm going to upload when I can, but I'm still going to try to make it at least 2 videos a month. So you still get something, but it takes some time to do it, but I'm gonna try to do my best. I just really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. It helps me a lot. Share it around. I think the more people are on the topic, the better. We're still on, our way to dismantle the current system, to have a better system that is benefiting all of us around the world. And in the meantime, I'll see you in my next video. Love always.